How does someone protect their thyroid?
So the question about what we can do to make sure that we protect our thyroid, a few things. Number one, I would say, is that we need to make sure we have a source of iodine in the diet. And you know, the vehicle that has been used to provide the population with iodine is iodized salt. And when people become more concerned about health, they get concerned about using iodized salt because of some of the components that are added to the salt to keep it flowing. Sometimes things like aluminum can be added, and so they're eliminating often iodized salt. And so they need to make sure they have an alternative source of iodine if they're not using iodized salt. And you can buy some iodized salt, like iodized sea salt and other iodized salt, that don't use the harmful agents that allow the salt to be free-flowing. But if you're not using that, and we want to limit our salt intake, so I can understand people not wanting to use that, we can use seaweed. But again, seaweed is actually really concentrated in iodine, especially certain types of seaweed like kelp. And so you have to be a little bit knowledgeable about how much to use. So for example, the dried kelp powder that you can buy as a sort of a sprinkling for your food, we're looking at between probably 1/10 and 1/16 of a teaspoon. It's not a lot. The upper limit for iodine is 1100 micrograms. The recommended intake is about 150. It's a little higher during pregnancy and lactation, but for most people, for most adults, it's 150. And so it's just a small amount that's needed. If you are, averse to using seaweed of any sort, then probably iodine drops or multi with iodine would be a reasonable option. There is some iodine in our food, depending on the soil content and so on, but it can be a little bit of a risky thing if you're not getting some sort of more concentrated iodine source. And in Europe, it's actually even worse because the soil content tends to be lower than it is in North America. So that's number one. Number two is, I think it's really important to protect your body's ability to produce hormones. And so we don't want to be over-consuming refined foods. We don't want to be over-consuming sugars. We don't want to be getting too much visceral fat, which can compromise our whole system of hormone production. We want to be exercising regularly. We want to be eating a lot of healthy foods. And some people worry about what we call goitrogenic foods because a lot of healthy foods have goitrogens in them. And so things like soy and flax and all kinds of cruciferous vegetables, which are our primary provider of things like isothiocyanates that induce phase 2 enzyme systems to help us get rid of harmful compounds that float around in our bodies. And so these are powerful foods. They contain goitrogens, but goitrogens, I just want to say this, goitrogens are not a concern if you have enough iodine in your diet. So we can have a variety of these foods and not worry about them. It's when we're iodine deficient or we're not eating enough iodine that goitrogens can just compound the problem. So I think that, basically we need enough of the key, a number of key nutrients which are important for hormone production, but those nutrients generally we get enough of when we eat a variety of whole plant foods. And I think it's a valuable thing to include enough nuts and seeds as well, because they tend to be really good sources of some of the trace minerals that we don't get in as great a quantity in other plant foods.